Last night, my 2-year-old we've had a problem with him waking up in the middle of the night, and usually it's like 2:30, 3:30, 4:30, something like that, and waking us up, and you go up there and tuck him back into bed, just to bed, and try to tell him not to wake us up again, but it doesn't succeed. Last night he was up at 11:15, 2:30 or 4:30. The dog was up at 1:30. The other baby was awake at 2. So if I'm talking to you today and I just start going blah, blah, you'll understand. You'll understand. Today is Justin's birthday, Justin Grifford. Well, happy birthday to Justin. Yeah, he had his children much younger than me, so he's doing. You're welcome. There you are. Yeah, just fine. Just leave. Go ahead. Enjoy your birthday. There's that young man, our youth minister. Today we're continuing our series, Sign Out, a series about social media and technology and how it's influencing our lives. Recently featured in the news, a Boston College professor, her name is Carrie Cronin, was featured, and because of an extra credit assignment that she gives to her students, which is kind of a strange extra credit assignment. She gives them extra credit if they ask someone out on a date. For real, she actually has done this apparently for quite some time. The reason that she does this is because she sees that her students are not interacting with each other in the same way. In fact, many of her seniors, in fact, have never been on a date, never intentionally asked on a date. Her requirements are that they have to know it's a date. You have to ask in person, not via text message. Okay, and there has to be no physical contact. I don't know exactly what that means in terms, maybe what's appropriate. Good luck in defining exactly what that might be. But it is true that digital communication and digital media and smartphones has influenced and may have forever changed the way that we communicate with each other. In 2007, the text message surpassed the actual phone conversation as a primary means by which we communicate with each other. And this is true not just for college seniors, but it begins at a very early age. Okay, this is our son Matthew. This picture was taken over a year ago. He was a year and a half in this picture, 18 months. And look, he's just a pro. He's already got it down. He's got his mother's iPhone here. And we have to really limit the time that he spends on that mobile device, because literally he would spend all day on it if we let him. It's a wonderful thing to be able to give your child something that will distract them, but we have to be careful and that it doesn't, I guess, lead to what could be an addiction. I mean, that's what the doctor said. We said that could happen. But we have one night a week that we watch TV as we eat, and so we give him the smartphone to. That's his distraction while we eat. But that's because they're easy to use. A 2-year-old can use it. An 82-year-old can use it. People maybe might dispute with that, but they are very easy to use, and that's why you see adults sometimes own them as much, or maybe even more so, than young people. And this is when he doesn't even know how to text or do Facebook or anything like that. The point made last week in this series, Sign Out, is that technology has given us the ability to be available to anybody, or literally to be available to everybody. Anybody in the digital world we can communicate with instantaneously. This is an incredible power. It's an incredible privilege that has been given to us, that you could be interrupted in the middle of what you are doing by literally anyone in the world, whether it's a text message, whether it's a retweet, or someone following you on Twitter, or a Facebook message, or whatever, an email. Literally, you can be interrupted at any time by anyone in the world. This is incredible. We are available to everybody. But as a result of this unlimited availability, it's affected the way that we interact with people who are in our lives every day. And as a result, we're available to everybody, but we're present to nobody. The people in our lives, the people living under the roof with us, our parents, our kids, our spouses, our siblings, our friends, the person who's standing in line next to us at Burger King, wherever it is that we're in line. We're attentive to our devices and everything that's there, and not attentive to the people who are actually around us, the people that we are experiencing the present moment with. We're available to everybody, but we're present to nobody, because real relationships, real meaningful, the most meaningful interactions in your life, they require work. They require effort. Studies show there's this 7-minute period of time where you're in a conversation, and usually that's where you get past kind of the superficial fluffness. There's a moment of silence. You either have to ask a question or share something vulnerable, and that's usually where people start going on their devices. They go on their smartphones because they don't get past that 7 minutes. They don't get past that awkward moment, that moment where there's a little bit of anxiety, and so our anxiety is to turn to what's familiar, what's become most familiar to us, which is our smartphone. And what I've noticed for me and myself is that I'm most tempted to turn to social media, or especially Twitter. For me, I think Twitter probably is more addictive to me than Facebook. And I turn there because when I find something I'm anxious about, or I hear something on the news, or I have some kind of encounter and makes me a little anxious about something, and sort of look on Twitter and I can find people talking about what I'm worried about, and usually they say things that I agree with. Okay? They're people that I look for the kind of voices that I want to hear, and I can congregate, and if somebody says things that make me mad, I don't have to follow them. Okay? I can only follow people that I like or that I agree with. Usually that's when I tend to I look to Twitter. I look for information. I'm not the only person that does that. Okay. I also notice that if I'm writing a sermon and I get to kind of a place where there's a block and I don't feel good about what I've got, or I feel like maybe there's a better point that I could be making, and I'm struggling through that. In the midst of that anxiety about that, guess what? Hey, wonder what the National League standings are. Let's just check. Wonder how the Braves. I wonder who has the highest batting average. All that information is right there to distract me immediately. Or if you're bored, right? If you're bored, there's plenty to find out. There's plenty of entertainment. There's plenty of things that you can find online to immediately satisfy, to distract you from being bored. Basically, the tension that we experience in life, we look for alleviation of that tension by information. We experience tension, and we believe that the right information can satisfy that tension or get rid of that anxiety. For example, it's no coincidence that ratings for MSNBC skyrocketed after Donald Trump was elected president. In their anxiety, people of a more progressive political stance turn to information, and information of a particular slant to alleviate the tension and anxiety they're experiencing. Some of you remember the rise of conservative talk radio and Rush Limbaugh when he really became famous. That was in the 1990s, right after the election of Bill Clinton as president. And there was lots of anxiety and there was lots of tension. And so people turned to voices that were saying what they believed and agreed with and really, to be frank, wanted to hear. We look for alleviation of tension by information. But really, does any of that actually solve the issue? Does it really make that tension go away? Has it satisfied the anxiety, or have you kind of just temporarily covered it up? Because when you think about it in your life, when you get to that anxious moment, and maybe instead of just sort of immediately satisfying, instead of looking to something to distract me from that sermon, right? If I'd actually kind of stick with it, and work with it, or maybe talk to somebody else about it. Or when you got bored and you were looking for something to do, okay? Really, some of your greatest moments of creativity came when you were bored. I mean, how many of you in the summertime, you were out of school and you were bored? You didn't tell your mama or daddy that you were bored, right? You didn't tell them that. At least I didn't, because I knew what they would say. Well, I'm bored. Well, I'll put you to work. Go cut the grass or something like that. But some of your greatest moments of creativity came when you were bored. You say, hey, let's go make a rope swing out in the yard. And then you fell and broke your leg, and that kind of thing happened. Maybe it wasn't that great of an experience, but some of your greatest moments of creativity came when your mind was wandering. And you thought about things and you worked through some things in your mind. Or maybe you were inspired, you talked to somebody about it. We look for alleviation of tension by the right information or the right knowledge if you will. We've always been tempted from the very beginning, thinking that knowledge was going to satisfy everything that we needed. But instead, ironically, we find this to be true, is that the way we find alleviation of tension is by cessation. And by cessation, I mean stopping. To stop and to rest. Instead of adding more and more and more, we find peace and actually alleviation of stress by taking away. And instead of complicating things, we find peace or alleviation of stress by simplifying. Or instead of having more or doing more, it's actually by doing less. Now, the people of Israel and the people of Judah were in a particularly anxious or tense moment in their history. The people of Judah were literally under the gun of the empire of Assyria. The Assyrians were pressing in upon them. The Assyrians had just conquered the nation of Israel, which was the northern 10 tribes of Israel. They had conquered their capital city of Samaria, and now they were bearing down on Jerusalem and Judah. And so here's Assyria, this mighty empire, the likes of which the world has never seen, and Sennacherib, who is the emperor of Assyria, bearing down on tiny Judah and Jerusalem. They've already taken out the northern 10 tribes. And here's the people of Judah, all that's left of the old nation of Israel, feeling very anxious and in fact helpless. They're a small nation. They don't have mighty armies. And so in the midst of their tense situation, they look for alleviation of that tension, for a place to find refuge. And at that time, Hezekiah, who was their king, and many of the people started talking about an alliance with Egypt. Because Egypt didn't like the Assyrians either. And Egypt was fighting against the Assyrians because they were encroaching all the way into Egypt. And they were centered in what is today modern-day Iran. And so there was this kind of discussion was going on. This was the time when Isaiah was the prophet of Judah. And he was a prophet for 3 or 4 kings in the history of Judah. But Isaiah has something to say, or particularly God has something to say through Isaiah to the people. This is what God says. This is what God thinks about this potential alliance. Woe to the obstinate children, declares the Lord. God actually says that a lot. Okay, God seems to speak up, especially when He's speaking a word of warning, which is what you would do if you were loving someone. You speaking a word of warning. Woe to the obstinate children, declares the Lord, to those who carry out plans that are not mine, forming an alliance. He's talking here about the alliance with Egypt, but not by my Spirit. In other words, you haven't consulted me about this. Instead of seeking my strength, you're seeking Egypt's strength. Heaping sin upon sin, he continues in verse 2, who go down to Egypt, there you go, without consulting me. You never talk to me about it. Who are you really trusting in? They who look for help to Pharaoh's protection, to Egypt's shade for refuge. Now here we're bringing back memories of what happened about 500-600 years before, and what all that Egypt represented for the people of Judah and the people of Israel. This was the place that they had been delivered from, that represented everything that they didn't stand for. This nation didn't worship the Lord. I mean, Pharaoh, who was their arch enemy in the past, and the values that this world represents is not your values. This is where you're turning for help, simply because they're powerful and impressive and nice and shiny, Here's what's going to happen. Pharaoh's protection will be to your shame. Egypt's shade will bring you disgrace. In other words, it's not going to work if you do this. Here's what you should do. And this is important. That just gives you some backstory on this context of this verse. This is the important verse. This is where our focus is today. This is what the sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel, says. In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength, but you would not have it. In repentance and rest. And this is such a key word for the people of Judah and the people of Israel. Actually, the root word for rest, the Hebrew word, is the same word from which the word Noah comes. Noah's name means rest, and we know what a significant place Noah plays in the story of the Old Testament. In fact, the people of Israel, rest was so important to them that they were to be primarily identified by their rest, which is weird. You'd think you would identify people by their accomplishments. But the people of Israel were to be identified by their rest, not just what they weren't supposed to do. You think about those 10 commandments. There's 10 of them, okay, of course, I would 10 commandments. 8 of them are thou shalt not commands. And only 2 of them are thou shalt commands. One of them is to honor your father and mother. And the other is what you shall do, but interestingly that it involves not doing. 6 days you shall labor, as Exodus 29, 9 and 10. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. You're going to be different from all the other nations. They work and work and work all the time because that is their life. They have no other existence outside of their own busyness. But you are to be different. You are to be like God. And God made everything in 6 days, and on the 7th day, He rested. 6 days you'll work, but the 7th day is for rest and play and fellowship and worship. In fact, they were so intense about this that on the 6th day of the week, which was Friday in our schedule, which is still observed, Friday, you're supposed to do double the preparations just to make sure you don't do anything on the Sabbath day. That you rest and worship God and enjoy fellowship with the people God's given to you. Now, as Christians, this command applies differently to us than it did to those in Isaiah's day and those in the Old Testament. Okay, the early Christians started worshiping Jesus on Sunday instead of the Sabbath day, which is Saturday. They started worshiping on Sunday because that was the day that Jesus had been raised from the dead, so they claimed. And so they started getting together early in the morning to worship, and then they would go to work after that. And so literally through time, what happened was that Sunday became more of a Sabbath day for Christians than the traditional Jewish Saturday. And I could argue, make the case that really our relationship to the Sabbath is different than that of the Jewish people, that the New Testament doesn't affirm the Sabbath in the same way as the Old Testament does. And so in some ways, this applies differently, but the same principle applies. And the principle behind this command, Jesus said, man wasn't made for Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for us, for man, for mankind. It is to be for us, for our sakes, not that we're supposed to serve it. And the bigger principle behind it is this, that if we don't take time to stop and to worship, that we will die spiritually. And that's exactly what we see happening in our culture today. It used to be, what happened is through time is that Sunday became known as a day to rest or a day to honor God. You remember, not even too long ago in our own culture, this was the case. I mean, everything closed down on Sunday. They had blue laws. Do you remember that? Blue laws where you couldn't sell alcohol on Sunday, or maybe there were certain things that were closed on Sunday. That was in existence not too long ago. Just as kind of a respect for this tradition of taking a day of Sabbath. Now that's been attacked and been carried to court and all this. It's unconstitutional to have blue laws, and all that kind of stuff. So what we've seen happen is that we've gone from being a 24/6 world to literally being a 24/7 world. We're all at it all the time. And so maybe there's a correlation between the spike in anxiety that we're seeing in the present day. Anxiety levels at unprecedented amounts, unprecedented levels of anxiety, and the gradual extinction of the Sabbath. Because more and more stuff gets crammed in. More and more people are open 7 days a week. Different activities, kids' activities, athletic events, tournaments, all these things get crammed in. Even on Sunday, which used to be kind of a day you didn't touch, but not anymore. And what happens is that we're busier and busier and busier and busier. And so we don't have time to stop. We don't have time to rest. We don't have time to worship. And the reason is because of our own anxiety. The reason it's so difficult to rest is because we have to be doing something. Because we're so anxious inside. We're so busy. And what happens is this becomes a cycle. That what is the cure we can't do because we have to be so busy all the time. Going, doing, whatever. And what happens is that these things, as wonderful as they are, and how they make so much of our life more convenient, more easily accessible, more easier to get work done. It does make it more easier to get work done with these things. But what happens is that it never leaves us. We carry it with us wherever we go. And so instead of resting, we're answering emails, we're answering text messages. We're available to everybody, but we're present to nobody, including God. Now, we all know that God can work through machines, okay? The machines are a tool by which God can use to communicate His grace. But we also know that we can become a tool of the very machine that God's given to us. And that sometimes what can happen, especially if we reach a place of, I would say, addiction to it, that the machine begins to take the place of God. That the affirmation and the acceptance that we get from the machine, although that sounds very strange, but the amount of likes we get on Facebook or how many followers we get or how many friends that we have and all that, or whatever, that becomes a means of identity and of affirmation. It's all about the image that the world sees of me and what they're saying about me. If that becomes our source of affirmation, it's taken the place of God in our life. Now, Isaiah a little bit later talks about what's the fruit of our identity and our assurance being based upon God and not upon the frantic activity of the world and of the information superhighway. He talks about this in Isaiah chapter 32, verse 15. Talks about the Spirit being poured on us from on high. The desert becomes a fertile field. The fertile field seems like a forest. Basically, that dry place, that place where there's no fruit, that God comes in and it becomes a place of abundance. I preached a series on that a couple of months back. That God comes in and turns the dry place into a place of abundance. Verse 16 talks about the Lord's justice will dwell in the desert. His righteousness live in the fertile field. And here is the fruit of that righteousness. Verse 17. The fruit of that righteousness, in other words, what it causes. What it causes on earth, what it causes in you. The fruit of that righteousness will be peace. Its effects will be quietness and confidence forever. It's interesting, we don't usually associate those two words, quietness and confidence. But they're here. In fact, another way this could be described is as trust. Confidence or trust. Now, I know, I've observed in my own life, in seasons of my life, and I've also observed it in others too, but it's in those seasons where I'm most likely to post on social media, or I'm most concerned about what I'm posting or paying attention to it and concerned about the image that I'm portraying out there, are those seasons that I'm feeling the least of this confidence. I'm feeling less confident. And I'm looking for that confidence or that assurance to whatever I find online or to social media. And what happens is that if that's the place where we turn, if that's the place where we get our confidence, we're going to go back to it over and over and over again. And then eventually it's going to become like a drug, to literally where you're not going to be able to be separated from it. A cousin of mine, he owns a Beef O'Brady's in Dothan, Alabama. And he told me, this was like 10 years ago. And this is probably just after the iPhone had been introduced, maybe even before. And he said, I found my employees were so distracted by their mobile devices, by their phones, that I was just going to take them away from them, just banned them. Said, you cannot bring them in the kitchen or wherever you're doing. He said, they started going nuts. They literally went crazy. So I had to give them back to them because they were just going crazy. That's a sign that maybe we become too attached. That if we can't function, instead of it becoming our tool, we become a tool of it. And when something becomes like a drug to us, we start to pull away, there's going to be withdrawals. Withdrawals that are hard. You'll start sweating and you'll start, feeling anxious. Those are withdrawal symptoms. But until we can get to a place of freedom, and it might seem kind of petty or stupid to talk about the cell phone having that kind of power over us. But until we can get to a place where we realize that maybe all that activity is covering up an inner emptiness within me, and until I'm ready to get rid of whatever false thing is filling that emptiness and get down to what really needs to fill that place in my life, to that place of quietness and rest. That might sound terrifying to you because you're addicted to activity, but you're not going to find what really satisfies and fills that empty place until you go there. Sherry Turkle, in her book Alone Together, says that only those who are not afraid to be alone, or those who are afraid to be alone, are those who are truly lonely. It's because we have an inner sense. There's a deeper, something fills our lives, a deeper fullness that is the fruit of a relationship with God. And so maybe our solution to find our true selves, we need to sign off, or we need to sign out. We need to detach from other things, to become more open to those things that are truly lasting, the deeper well that we can draw from, to find a true sense of acceptance and identity, an image of ourselves. Doesn't come from likes on social media or Twitter or Instagram or wherever. But it comes from God, the opinion that matters above all. Well, I have a practical word of advice to you, if this is the case for you. Okay, and I think this is something that all of us can take to heart, or you can just ignore it, just whatever, just take it for what it is. But to help us to cultivate that inner sense of peace and to practice rest in our own lives, maybe a place to start, especially if you're addicted to activity, especially the activity on your phone is taking away from meaningful interactions with your family members and other people in your life. Maybe you should consider a screen Sabbath. Okay? You may catch the irony of this moment. Okay? Well, I'm pointing here to the screen. Yeah, there you go. Thank you a lot there. A screen Sabbath! Yeah, how about that? Now, we're terrified there for just a moment. But take a break from the screens. Andy Crouch, in his book, The Text-Wise Family, talks about what he and his family, they set a goal is that they have 1 hour a day and 1 day a week and 1 week a year where they put away their devices. And they just have meaningful interactions with each other. They feast, they work, or they don't work. They feast, they rest, and they play together. Enjoy time as a family. Now, that might seem impossible for you, especially if your work involves your your phone or your mobile device, and that just seems like an impossibility. For me, the idea of a week does seem kind of challenging. How would I do that? But maybe there's an hour a day that you can set aside your phone. When it's time for your meal, to sit around the table with your family, you can put away those distracting devices and give attention to your people in your life. How was your day today? What's going on in your life? What's troubling you today? Well, you talk to each other. Or maybe there's one day a week where you're home, it's your off day, and you can leave that mobile device, you can leave it in a different room, okay? Maybe you just go back and check it a couple of times a day instead of having it with you 24/7, okay? Maybe you're using it as a way to track how many steps you're taking so you have some kind of goal in that regard. Maybe there's other things that you can do to substitute that. But a screen Sabbath. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You think, well, what am I going to miss? Think about all I'm going to miss if I do that. But think about all that you are missing because you're not. In the lives of the people who are closest to you, that you are present to in your life. Or maybe it's another thing that we discover, one of the beautiful things about taking a Sabbath day, not just a screen Sabbath, any kind of Sabbath day, is that we discover is that even when we stop, the world keeps going. The world will keep going even when you stop. If you take a stop for your own well-being, the well-being for yourself and your family, the world will keep going. And what you may discover is that you're not as essential to the world functioning as you think you are. That you're not as important or as essential as you think you are. And that can be disturbing or depressing to some people, or it can be liberating to realize that it's not all up to me, that God is the one who governs the world. Because basically, when we're so busy all the time, we don't have time for God. He's squished out of everything. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus has an encounter with Martha and Mary. And he comes over to their house, and Martha is very distracted about all the work that she has to do to get ready to prepare for her host. And she misses her host. She misses the whole point behind the visit because she's so busy. And she's upset about it, and she tells Jesus so because her sister Mary is just sitting there listening to Jesus, not doing anything. And Jesus speaks to her and says, "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things." There's lots of things to get worried about. And a lot of times in our search for information to alleviate that tension, we find even more things to be anxious about. You are worried and upset about many things, but only a few things are needed, or indeed only one. And Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. She didn't miss the moment because she was attentive to what was most important. Not that all these preparations, not all these other things are important, but there are some things that are most important. There are some things that take priority. What do you call that? When you prioritize the one thing against all the other things. You call it, and you decide to fluff off some of the unnecessary for what's truly necessary. Call it simplicity. Simplicity is choosing the one thing over many things, or prioritizing those few things over all the many things. And what we discover is that it's simplicity that gives us freedom from anxiety. Can you imagine how your life would be different? How this world would be different if we prioritize the one thing over the many things? How would it be different? How would your schedule be different? How would your spending be different? How would your calendar, how would your habits, how would all these things be different if we attended to the most important things? How would you perceive yourself? How confident would you be? How much peace would you have in your soul if the one thing was most important? And like Jesus said, few things. There would be other things that would be important because the one thing is important. Well, today, I challenge you choose the one thing, to choose simplicity, to choose the one who loved you so much that he came to earth for you, that he gave up his life for you. He came back from the dead so that you could have life. Choose him. He died for you. He lives today. And he has a mission for you to get involved in that will forever change your priorities. Choose him today, whether it's for the 100th time, or the 1,000th time, or the first time. Choose it.